Okay, so welcome to Kimara Life Podcast. This is my friend Walter again.
Hey everyone. Yeah, I think we recorded one podcast before.
Yes, exactly. And so this one piece is going to be about the hero's journey because I do have a background in film, and then we're going to merge it with psychology, mental health.
Exactly. So in a way, it's
like
like trying to take the narrative format of the hero's journey and make it more applicable because it's like we're inspired by stories, we're moved by stories, and it's like there's a reason why we find ourselves immersed into them. So then it's like what came to mind and what I was talking to Claudia about is how can we narrate our own stories and how can we look at it from that perspective?
Yes. So like a lot of the film structures, the films that we see nowadays have the hero's journey as a structure.
Right.
And I think it's so like it's such a fine line between like the psychology of the film, like what the protagonist goes through, the antagonist go through, the main characters go through, the other characters go through, and they all have their own journey within the film environment. So not only within like internal journey, but there's an external journey also happening at the same time.
And I think that's what makes it interesting because I'm trying to go through The Hero with a Thousand Faces by Joseph Campbell. And within it, he talks about the hero's journey, more so archetypes and collective unconscious. A lot of things that have some kind of familiarity with, but it was still a difficult read. But something that he said that really stuck out to me was when he talked about the hero's journey, it's fundamentally something that's happening internally. Incidentally, it's happening outside. So we only see things from a certain perspective, but internally, it's like the character has to go through something in order to get to that destination that they want to get to.
Exactly. And I want to highlight like every single character that we see in film, they do things with a purpose, and it's to move the story forward. So if you see a gesture, if you see a phone call, if you see something drop, or if it's something happens in their environment, it leads them into doing the next action psychologically. And so I think that's why films have kind of gone with this structure has been almost like replicated so many times and duplicated in so many films because it works. It's literally the stages that each character goes through as we watch the narrative evolve.
And that's something I found interesting too, because in the book, it's also speaking about how the structure goes. And it's like the kind of symbol that they gave it was like a circle. Because there's a certain starting point, you go through all of these different phases, but then it goes back to that starting point because that person is going back into their world with this internal change. And it's like kind of like that obligation in this format is, what was it that you experienced and what was it of value that you want to bring into your everyday world? Exactly. And in a way, it's like that's why some stories are captivating as sequels as well, because in a way you're retelling the story, even though that person is developed, but they still have to go through some kind of additional transformation. So it goes to this idea that it's like we are in a state of constant change. There is no aspect of permanence. We don't remain as we are because we're constantly growing.
And this concept of not being permanent but temporary is huge in mental health because we're constantly talking about how we are beings of constant change. We're constantly evolving. And if people engage in radical acceptance in their own journey, it leads to, wow, like, I don't need to be the same every day. I can be different every day. Things can be differently. I can choose differently every day. And so that's why we wanted to like hit on this topic because it's all these different stages in a narrative, but each stage leads the character into evolving and changing and starting something new, developing, evolve, like, how actual humans go into their day-to-day lives.
So I do have a question for you. It's like, could you give us an overview of like, what are some of those aspects of that journey?
Yeah, so we have the begin stage, right? So what was the first stage? The first stage is here, the ordinary world, it's called. And so it's the hero being familiar with their environment, their day-to-day, they're going on their day-to-day, and all of a sudden, what?
There's something that changes. So it's like, what I really like about that everyday environment is like, that's something that we find ourselves in this very moment.
Exactly.
What are our circumstances? Where are we in life? And the thing is that I found interesting too is like sometimes it's like it happens so suddenly that you don't anticipate it. It's like you're going through everyday life, and then there is something presented to you that is either intended to steer you towards a new adventure, or you could resist that. And I think that's kind of like what that initial part of it is, because in the book itself, it talks about that initial stage of called separation. So it's in that separation that it's like we are taking ourselves from our everyday environment and choosing something that's unfamiliar.
Yeah.
Because it's in that unfamiliarity, there's a potential for growth. And it kind of what we talked about, it's like if we're in a state of permanence, then it's like it's a state of the familiarity.
Yeah, we're comfortable. We're doing the day-to-day. We're not stepping out of our comfort zone. So when we take the decision to do something different, right? Or something presents itself. And I like to call these like curveballs in therapy. Like, hey, like a curveball happened. What do we do with this curveball? Do we accept it? Do we embrace it? Do we reject it? Do we avoid it? Like, what are some ways that we cope through this curveball? And how do we move forward with that?
Yes. And it's like, I think there are also moments too, it's that we find ourselves in a state of complacency, like going through the motions. Because I think there are moments, it's like we all come across that it's like there was something that we were excited for, and we were actively pursuing it because of the prospect of the reward that it would give us, in which it's like we make it to this stage and we accept what we receive, but then it's like, what is beyond that?
Yeah, what comes next?
I think about when we were in grad school. It's like it was always the next class, the next semester,
the next thing.
We get to graduation, it's it's a party, it's a celebration, but then
But
it's
what's
like
next?
Exactly.
We start again the cycle, right? The cycle begins again.
So I think it's like, what are some observations or some things that people can look for in that phase of their journey?
Well, I often propose in session. I often propose, what is your upgrade, right? Like what's next? Because, and I call it an upgrade because you're not the same person you were yesterday. You're not the same person you were a week ago. You're not the same person you were a month ago. You're not the same person you were a year ago. So I often ask people, what's your upgrade? What is happening now that is serving you in the best way? What is positive? What is present in this moment? And I think being present correlates really well with engaging in your own narrative and telling your own narrative, because when we are focused in what is happening now, we can make decisions that are, I guess, I want to say like more effective, because we're literally feeling all of our senses in this moment, and we're thinking about our decisions versus rushing through them. Right? And said, so we're in a more of like a manual mode versus an automatic mode, rushing through our lives, not even paying attention to anything, and then manual mode being more intentional with what comes next.
It makes me think about that. It's like before any kind of change can occur, there has to be some kind of awareness. It's like you need to be in tuned to not just your environment, but also to yourself.
Yeah.
But the thing is, that self-reflection may be a little scary at times. And it's like, I think there are moments where it's like we are rushing through things, because what would it mean for us if we stopped to actual contemplate?
To pause. Yes, exactly. What would it mean for us to pause and breathe and reflect or journal or cope, etc.? So like, and I think with characters and in films, characters are really good at just doing the next thing or making the next decision, right? Because they have to. So a lot of the things that we see in movies, it's almost like an environmental change that almost obligates the character to make a decision. So sometimes the big events that happen in movies have to do with like the character has no option sometimes, and then they have to make a decision because it has to move the story forward. And that's where we engage in the call to adventure. So the opportunities, the challenges presenting, the curiosity, you're invited to do something. What if I did this? Could I get this? What is my gain? What is next? And that is the call to adventure in the hero's journey.
That makes me think, so there's a word that popped out when we said opportunity.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's in opportunity, there is a chance for us to, it's like, to take it, in which it's like, if we're presented with something that we've always felt like an internal inclination towards, like a nudge in that direction, do we pursue it or do we refuse it? And I think that's also ties into that third phase in which it's like, sometimes people refuse to take that step forward. And it's like, what are some of those considerations of why people may refuse that call?
Yeah. I think fear is huge.
Yeah.
Fear is often the wall that presents itself, and then we go into the anxiety mode of like, what if this happened? What if that happened? If I didn't do this, if I didn't do that, and then the fear sometimes arises, and it's up to the person to identify that fear, acknowledge it. Do we process it? Do we work through it? Or do we like skip it? Or do we avoid it? And I like to describe this often in session where it's like, I bring up a chair, right? And the chair of opportunity. And so we have a chair here, right? And so what is going to prevent you from not getting into the next chair? Like, do you give the chair away? Do you give it to someone else? Or do you become complacent with where you're at? Or become fearful where we become almost like blinded to like I don't even want to see this. I'm scared of this, but it might be a really good opportunity, but we are not seeing that because of that big wall. And so sometimes the work evolves like identifying the fear, acknowledging it, and thinking about what is the worst thing that could happen, but also what is the best thing that could happen.
So it's that presentation. It's like, okay, worst case scenario, best case scenario, and of course there's that spectrum of in between. And even going to this idea of fear, it's not always something that can be seen or something tangible. Sometimes it's something that's unknown.
Yes, and it could also be a link also to the past, something that we might have experienced in the past that like is leaking into our present moment. And it's like, oh, this is triggering from what happened 10 years ago, but it's not the same situation. And so sometimes the skill would be to identify like, hey, like, this has nothing to do with me. This is completely different than what happened 10 years ago. It doesn't necessarily mean that this will happen again.
Right.
So how can I look at this situation and say, okay, how can I approach this differently? More of a learning perspective versus a like blocking perspective or a fearful perspective. So that would be a skill there to identify like, oh, wow, like maybe I can do this differently. And it's not necessarily the same situation. So learning how to separate those two situations and working through them in that way.
That actually makes me think about something
Easier
else.
said than done.
It absolutely is. But
definitely.
It makes me think of something that I came across in the book itself, in which it talked about, it's like, if we are even to make it past that barrier and threshold and crossing it, it's like there has to be two things that are present. Competency and courage. Because the thing is, it's like more often than not, the hero places himself in that situation and they're willing to go for it because there's courage. Even if they are fearful of something, they are still willing to confront it and move. So it makes me think about the moments like, what is it? Courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to go through even if you are afraid.
Oh, 100%. And we see that in so many characters. Like, they contemplate it, and sometimes it's so quick. It's like, I have to do this. I have to take the risk, because if I don't do this, nothing will change, right? And it's almost that, I like to call it like healthy anxiety, like this little healthy anxiety that we might have that might push us into taking the next step, and that's completely okay to have.
Because it could spur us into action.
Exactly, that motivation, anxious motivation to like, oh, I need to do this differently, because it's if I do the same things over and over again, I'm not moving from here.
And that's why competency is also important too, because it's like, even if someone is courageous, it doesn't necessarily mean they do have the skill set to get to that phase of the journey.
Yeah.
Because it's like, I think that's why we go through seasons of training, seasons of self-development.
But if you never did it, then how would you know? Like, how would you grow, right?
It goes back to what you were talking about. It's like, let's say I previously failed at something. the courageous thing to do would be, it's like, okay, I'm looking at this, I accept the failure. What could I do better? Skill building. What are some of the different things that we could, like, for example, in like a presentation, it's like, you have to know what you're talking about. It's like you have to look through the PowerPoints, you have to be familiar with the terms. There has to be a familiarity with it before you can present it.
But sometimes you're not even prepared. And
No,
you
that's
have to
true.
just do it.
Exactly,
right?
but it's
we
like,
just have to do it.
and that's where we go through that process, in which is like, it's okay to fail.
Yeah.
It's not the end all be all if you do fail.
And failure brings up a lot of opportunities, because if you never took, let's say you sat on that chair, that next opportunity, but then you realize that it wasn't the best one. It wasn't the best decision. It wasn't the best opportunity. We can say, oh, but I know that I shouldn't do this now. Or there's a discovery piece, an exploration piece, a brainstorming piece, a creativity piece there of like, oh, I'll do this differently. Or next time I'll try to sit in this chair, except not this one, right? And like I'll learn that I need a different path. I don't need to be in this path, right? And then we learn a different chair, and like it evolves.
And that's how we expand our horizons.
Yeah.
Because it's like, it's trying something new. It goes back to this idea in which it's like, when we're trying something new, we're trying something that's not familiar to us. It's something that's unknown to us.
Exactly.
But then it goes back to this state of self-preservation that we may find ourselves in.
And I think that
because
goes
of that.
to the next one, which is refusal of the call.
That blend of
Yes, exactly what you were saying. Like, we hesitate. Sometimes we refuse the call. And this is where the fear might come in, the insecurity, reluctance to take the next step. And so what are the character goes into, why am I holding back? Why am I going through this? Like, why should I do this? What's the worst thing that could happen? So very similar to like what the next step is.
It actually makes me think of something else too. It's like sometimes we sabotage our own progress. We don't even think about it, but sometimes we self-sabotage.
Self-sabotage, yeah.
Because it's like, this is something that we want. It's like over here. But then internally, without even thinking about it, we want to fail so we can say, hey, I tried it, I failed, I'm going to do something differently now, without ever fully embracing it or being immersed and willing to fail.
Or quitting first.
Yeah.
Or quitting at the beginning. Not even thinking about, wow, like, why should I, right? And then we go into this like tunnel vision of like, why should I even do this, right? And so like, there goes another fear piece there, right? Like quitting at first. I get it. Sometimes we quit because we know that it's definitely not for you. But if we can't even engage in it for a period of time, how do we know that we really don't like it or that we really do like it?
I think sometimes it comes down to how we internalize something.
Yeah.
Because then it's like, it's kind of like that difference between guilt and shame. It's like guilt being I did something bad, shame being I am bad. So then it's like, how do we perceive that failure? It's like, how do we view it? It's like, can we look at it as something outside of us? And we're just like, okay, I failed. I didn't do as well as I could have. What could I have done better? Versus like, I failed, therefore I am a failure. And then how does that influence our life moving forward? Because it's like, if we live with this narrative that we are failures, we're never going to take chances again.
Yes. I also often introduce the topic of the healing self-narrative and a non-healing self-narrative. What is your non-healing self-narrative? What is not healing? What do you tell yourself that doesn't allow you to move forward? And that can come, that could be a lot to carry, right? Because it could be a whole timeline in your life where we engage in a non-healing self-narrative. And so as an adult, we engage in the non-healing self-narrative. However, I always like to propose this. If you have the choice to choose what belongs to you in your own narrative, and if someone just in therapy maybe, or someone in your life says, now you have the choice to be the leader in your life and to choose your narrative. What does that narrative look like? So if everything else was discarded, what would you say about yourself that would be healing?
Sometimes it's a little terrifying
It
to
is
consider
very
yourself
terrifying.
as a leader of your own life, because it makes me think about what was it, Soren Kierkegaard? He was like a Danish existential philosopher,
Okay,
and he
yeah,
was
yeah.
talking about there's a dizziness to this freedom that we experience, because it's like now it's filled with possibility. And the thing is, because there's so many options, opportunities, and possibilities, it could be a bit paralyzing for us, because it's like, what if we commit to something, but then it's like, now it's like, no, but I could have chosen this, I could have chosen this, I could
all
have
the
chosen this.
opportunities.
Exactly, because sometimes we feel like if we have to go on one path, it means losing out on everything else.
Well, I like to ask people,
Yeah.
do you make a choice to fail? Do you make choices to fail? Do you make choices to fail?
Oh, you're asking me?
I don't know. I'm just asking everyone who's listening. Do you make choices to fail? And most of the time, some people say no.
Yeah.
Yes. Some people say, but most of the time, people say no. Why? Because you never have ill intention to fail. You never want to fail. No one is in the business of living and failing, right? Nobody wants to fail unless you really embrace failure, right? But like, it's almost like trusting yourself. And I think it goes a little bit beyond that, like actually trusting your decision. And because what decision you're making is always the best decision, because we're not in it to fail. Does that make sense? Even though it might feel that way later on after the fact, it doesn't necessarily mean that you want to fail. And so it's this trust of like, I'm making this decision. This is the best option I have in this moment. Again, in this moment, because there might be other moments that might be better, but in this moment, that is the best decision.
Makes you think about the idea, it's like we are doing with the best that we can with what we know.
Exactly. It's the same thing in therapy, right? Like, this is what I knew then. This is what I know now. How can I use the tools that I learned in session to evolve myself, right? To use them outside of therapy, to do things differently.
And I think it's like that's what makes therapy very useful, and being able to go through some aspect of self-discovery, because you want to understand yourself more.
Yeah.
You want to understand your strengths, your weaknesses, your affinities. It's like you're nudging. So it's going back to those internal inclinations that we have, and then based on those, making a decision to go in that path. Because I wonder if there are moments that it's like people tell us a path to go on, even though it's not where we really want to go.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because it's like, do we allow people to influence your path, right? And then we move forward, or do we not allow people to influence our path and then we still move forward, right? And then we make our own decisions. And both can happen.
That's what I was going to say.
Totally
There's sometimes an interaction between it, because it goes to the next phase of this journey. So it's like, okay, so we find ourselves in which it's like there's a call to adventure, there's an opportunity to refuse that call, but then there's the next phase, which is called meeting the mentor. This is the person that the hero encounters on that journey.
This is Yoda, everyone.
But here's the thing, it's like, especially in today's times, it may not even be someone that we meet, but a word that we hear.
Yes, exactly. And we talked about this when we prepped for this.
Yeah.
The mentor doesn't have to be a person or a creature or a character. It can very much be a fortune cookie. It can literally be a fortune cookie. It could be a word, something someone said. It could be an experience. It could be a situation, right? What is guiding me into this challenge that I'm about to face? Because in film, we face challenges, right?
Exactly.
And in life as well. So who is your mentor in life?
And
who are the things that you encounter that inspire you to move forward?
And here's another thing too, because it's like going back to that idea, is like who's speaking into our lives. If that wise mentor is not a fortune cookie, is an actual person, maybe that person sees something in you that you didn't see in yourself.
Yeah.
And it's that encouragement that gives us a little bit of that motivation to move forward.
And that's exactly why I with people that, for example, have businesses or small businesses, I always encourage, bring people to brainstorm. You have to bounce off ideas from others, to engage in the creativity as well. Doing things on your own, like a little bit of like a lone wolf, might not necessarily be so helpful. Sometimes engaging in collaboration is what allows you to move to the next step, because it's what people see in you, what people see in the situation, what people see in the project. What do you see? What do I see? How can we move this forward? How can we be creative? And so meeting the mentor could also be a group of people, a group of engaging in this collaborative process.
Exactly. So it's like it's always that external force that somewhat influences the internal. But in the end of the day, people could say all these things and speak into your life. But in the end of the day, you are still responsible for your actions. You are the one that needs to move forward.
There's accountability there.
Exactly.
But I think I call it accountability and responsibility.
Yeah.
There's a radical acceptance there too. Like you need to know that obviously like everyone who chooses to be present is accountable for being present. You know, you are accountable for being present, right?
There's an interaction that's occurring. It's like, what is one person doing? How do we internalize it? And how do we respond with what's happening?
Exactly.
And it's like that kind of like brings it, I think, to that last phase of that separation that we go through. And it's called crossing the threshold. It's, okay, you are committing to that adventure. You are wanting to go into this new unfamiliar world, and you are leaving what's behind.
Yeah.
You're leaving where you are.
It's the portal. I just think about visually like in film, like the portal as the person steps in. Alice in Wonderland.
In a way, it could also be the submitting an application.
Yes.
So it's like, whether it's like, okay, I want to go to school for this, or I want a job opportunity for this, it's okay, I recognize all these criteria, these eligibilities, this gauntlet that you have to go through, but it starts with submitting the application, because it's the moment you submit it, you decided to commit to that journey and go through whatever it is that you will experience.
Yeah. And that could also, crossing the threshold can be very fearful for a lot of people. Yes. And you can experience fear in that process. But I think that's a very natural response to fear the unknown, because the unknown is in front of you. The challenge is in front of you. The unknown is in front of you. So it's like, whoa, what am I facing moving forward? But I think it's a nice reminder, right, if, as people, to stay present in that moment that you crossed the threshold, because there's nothing worse to be engaged in like a tunnel vision of anxiety while you're crossing the threshold, right? Like thinking about the future. At that point, it's just going to give you a lot of anxiety and nerves and stress. So, right? So we have to stay present when crossing the threshold. And in that journey, literally smell the roses. Literally take it one day at a time. Slow down with what you're doing. So, and also take time to rest. Like take time to rest in that experience, because burnout is real. Like that is really real. So,
Let's like, I think in maybe a tangible way to like try to recognize it. Like, for example, let's say you've always been interested in running, and then it's like someone says, hey, have you ever thought about running a marathon? Or it's one thing to run 1 mile, 2 miles, and 3 miles, but it's another thing to run over 26 miles. So then it's like, okay, you have to accept that it's like, okay, to train for a marathon, it's going to involve committing to running multiple times throughout the week. It's a training process. And the thing is, while you're training, while you're exercising, you are intentionally exposing yourself to discomfort. And it's one of these, it's a training principle that I've come across, in which it's like our body is going to adapt to the stresses that we impose on it. So we have to experience some level of stress. And it goes back to this aspect of growth. We develop into runners by running. And also doing other things to help support it.
And I like to add to what you just said. Your body adapts, but it also remembers.
Body keeps a score.
And if it's healthy or not healthy, both. So like it'll remember, it'll know when you're, training, it'll know that you did XY exercise, right, 10 years ago, and it'll know what to do next, right? But also it'll also keep in score if we didn't do something so good to our bodies.
But the thing is, there's more than just one type of stress. It's the distinction between eustress and distress. Eustress is a positive form of stress. It's that kind that will help us adapt. Distress is something entirely different. That could be a traumatic experience.
Yeah. Yes. And I think that's why it's important to find the right people that could help you process whatever it is that we've experienced, right? That was traumatic. And then, and through that journey, we can find coping skills that could help us work through it. Because I think it's not just body, but it's also mental, emotional. It's energetic too. Yeah. There's this like a piece there that could be spiritual as well. And all of that comes together in wellness and mental health. And I just posted one. It said, mental health is not just mental, it's everything else.
Yeah.
And I stick to that because that one is huge. A lot of people think, oh, mental health, just, talk to your therapist.
It's just catharsis. We're just talking about our feelings.
We're just talking forever. And that's not necessarily true. There's a lot of aspects to your mental health.
And I think that's what's interesting about wellness, because there's an integration of multiple things that are good for us. So it's like talking to someone is great, but it's like, how are you eating? How are you sleeping?
Yeah.
Are you exercising?
Everything else.
Exactly. It's every other thing that contributes to that. That's why I like the idea of a holistic approach to wellness, because holistic means encompassing the whole person. We're not compartmentalizing ourselves. No. Everything contributes and spills over.
Exactly.
And it goes back to what you were saying about friends too that are on the journey. And this more so ties into the next phase of it, which is the initiation. But it's like we don't really have to explore that part today.
But, I mean, I want to acknowledge this piece because this is where all the challenges and at the same time growth happens. Because we committed to it, we endured through it, we're present with it, and now it's like, whoa, this is what I'm facing now. This is the challenge.
And I think it's like that's what makes it, going back to just briefly, it's like the
learning piece there
too. It's the people that you meet along the way as well, because it's like, okay, now you're going into this new area. The thing is, while you're on this journey, you're going to meet people that have a similar interest in what you're pursuing. They may not be in it for the same reasons, but they just so happen to be on that same path. So it's like there are multiple people that are trying to run a marathon, everyone for different reasons, but now it's like there's a common goal in running that marathon together.
Yeah.
So it's like you endure things together. Hence why in a lot of these stories, these main characters have friends that support their journeys.
And I think it's important. The support system is super important. And I want everyone to know that they're not alone. You're not alone in your challenge. You're not alone in whatever you are experiencing, because there's always someone else that is experiencing something similar or is feeling the same things you're feeling. And the support system is huge too. Being able to find the people that you love, or your family of choice, or your partner, or your friend. These are all the people that will add to your day-to-day, to this challenge that you are facing.
And that's another neat thing too, in which it's like people are supporting our journeys. How are we mutually supporting someone else's journey? Because again, the whole idea of this is like we are all on our own journeys. There is no main character in this life.
Exactly.
Everybody is experiencing something. Everyone is going through a hardship. Everyone may find themselves in a different phase of it, but in the end of the day, we are all supporting each other's life to some kind of extent.
Yeah, 100%. And I think this is a good note to end.
I think so too, because it's like, it's in that next aspect that we explore the initiation. It's like now that we're committed to the journey, now we're going to experience a lot more challenge, because the hard part is actually starting now, because now we are in it.
The challenge, the growth, the learning, what is helping me, what is not, what are we adapting to?
But I like it's like that aspect, it's like we took that first step, we're committing to it, but now we're going to have to experience everything that comes with taking that step.
Exactly. So what we're going to do is we're going to pause here, and at a different time, we'll record the part 2 of our conversation with Walter about the hero's journey and our mental health at the same time.
Yep, sounds good.
So thank you so much for listening.
Thank you.